The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me. On this episode, I am wrapping up my reviews of the player cards in Dim Carcosa with a look at the neutral cards. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, traditionally, I review the Survivor and neutral cards together in the same review, but the neutral card in this pack is truly something special, so I'm going to make an exception in this case. There is only one neutral card in this Mythos pack, and it is going to open some doors to some new deck archetypes. This is the Key of Yees. Let the storm rage. The Key of Yees costs 5 experience points and 3 resources, and it has a wild and willpower skill icons. It has the item and relic traits and takes up the accessory slot. It has 4 sanity and the game text. You get +1 to each of your skills for each horror on Key of Yees. The key also has 2 forced effects. First, when any amount of horror would be placed on you, you meaning your investigator card, place 1 of that horror on Key of Yees. Second, when the Key of Yees leaves play, discard the top 10 cards of your deck. Now, if you've spent any time perusing the forums over the past month or so, you've probably seen at least one comment from a player proclaiming that the Key of Yees is broken. I haven't had a chance to play with the card yet, so I'm not quite prepared to go that far. However, this card is undeniably powerful, perhaps maybe a little too powerful for the strings attached. And let me explain what I mean by that. Assets that provide static boosts to skills, including cards like Beat Cop, Dr. Myling Christopher, and Peter Sylvester, are some of the most powerful cards in the Arkham Horror LCG. And it's really easy to understand why. They help you pass skill tests, and skill tests are the backbone of this game. Now, assets that boost multiple skills are even more powerful, but they tend to come with some sort of drawback to keep them balanced. Unless, of course, you're level 2 Peter Sylvester, which is definitely a little bit above the curve. Take a look at Dark Horse, the Survivor asset that was released in Undimensioned and Unseen. Dark Horse will boost all of your skills by +1, but only while you have no resources in your resource pool. The drawback on Dark Horse forces players to give something up in exchange for that skill boost. For most players, that means forgoing expensive assets and events. You can have your skill boost, but don't expect to be able to play powerful Survivor cards like Look What I Found and Will to Survive 2. We've seen a couple other assets in this cycle that boost multiple skills, and they too have drawbacks. Dario Elamine, the rogue ally released in the Unspeakable Oath, provides a static +1 boost to willpower and intellect. However, you only get that boost while you have 10 or more resources. If you want to accumulate 10 resources quickly, you're going to need to prioritize cards that provide resources while building your deck, which likely means passing up on other cards to make room for them. And once you've got those 10 resources, you really need to sit on them like Scrooge McDuck. And that can be difficult for rogues to do because they tend to spend their resources as quickly as they accumulate them. St. Hubert's Key, a mystic asset released in Black Star's Rise, provides a +1 boost to your willpower and intellect, but at the cost of -2 sanity. Now, I think you can make a compelling argument that this isn't really a drawback, since the card's response allows you to discard St. Hubert's Key to immediately heal 2 horror when you would be defeated by horror. You also happen to get that 2 sanity back when you discard St. Hubert's Key. However, that -2 sanity is a drawback for an investigator such as Agnes Baker, who relies on her sizable sanity pool to take down enemies. It also restricts your ability to use cards such as Forbidden Knowledge, Shriveling, Ward of Protection somewhat, although Mystics do have other cards that can soak horror for them. In the case of a deck like Agnes Baker, she's got her boyfriend Peter Sylvester to do all that work for her. That brings us to the Key of Yees, which has 2 drawbacks. First, when you would take horror, including direct horror, you must place 1 of that horror on the key. That powers up the key, but if you take horror too frequently, the key won't remain in play for long. However, you can play around this drawback. Every investigator in the game has access to cards that can soak horror, whether they be allies, items, or the composure assets released in Echoes of the Past. If you play the key in combination with Peter Sylvester, for example, you can power it up at your leisure and then let Peter soak horror for you for the rest of the game. Now, direct horror is a threat to the key, but cards that inflict direct horror are still relatively rare, so that really is going to depend on a scenario-by-scenario basis. The second drawback of the key is that you must discard the top 10 cards of your deck when it leaves play. I don't really consider this to be much of a drawback, since your investigator doesn't get killed or go insane when you deck yourself. You simply take a horror, reshuffle your deck, and start off fresh. In fact, if you deck yourself after the key leaves play, the key gets reshuffled into the draw deck, and with a little luck it won't be long before the key is back in play working its magic. The only time losing the key may be potentially fatal is if you have only one sanity left, which is unlikely if you've been using other assets to soak horror to keep the key in play, or a card like Beyond the Veil is in your threat area. However, there have been several cards released this cycle, such as Quantum Flux and Devil's Luck, that can be used to tame that fearsome treachery from the Dunwich Legacy. So I'd be certainly willing to use to run the key if I was running through the Dunwich Legacy campaign. Now, while I don't think much about the key's drawbacks, I suspect that it's closer to balanced than outright broken. 5 experience points is a lot to pay for one card. Unless you've got some way to reliably tutor for the key, you're likely to want 2 of them to ensure that you can first find it and play it quickly. If you're spending 10 experience points on 2 cards, you're going to have to make some sacrifices elsewhere, at least in the short term. If you're playing a Guardian, Rogue, or Mystic, you're probably passing up on better weapon spells and resource generation or action advantage. If you're playing a Seeker, you're passing up on cards that help you gather clues faster, which is quite critical if you're playing multiplayer in particular. I think survivors are probably in the best position to use the key. I haven't been all that impressed by many of the survivor upgrades of late, so I think the key has a lot of potential in that class. William York can either play the key from his discard pile if he defeats an enemy, or return it to his hand if he draws an Elder Sign. Other investigators have scavenging to pull off the same trick. That said, if you're saving up for 2 copies of the key, you're probably not upgrading to Peter Sylvester or Lucky all that early in the game. And you're probably not purchasing Will to Survive either, so the survivors do have some sacrifices to make as well. It's also important to note that the key doesn't enter play with 3 horror on it. You need to power it up before you reap the rewards. That could be painfully slow depending on the scenario, so you may want to consider cards such as Forbidden Knowledge or Painkillers to speed up the process. It may also be worth pursuing the key if you draw Chronophobia or Hypochondria as your basic weaknesses. If you're playing in the Path to Carcosa campaign and you're desperate to take a horror, you can also say the name of a certain ancient one at a certain point. I'm not going to say that name now because it's dangerous, but it is an option if you need a horror. The Key of Yees provides such a powerful boost to your stat line that it's going to be very attractive. It's going to be a very attractive option to a lot of different investigators. The only 2 investigators who may shy away from it are Agnes Baker and possibly Carolyn Fern. Agnes' special ability doesn't synergize very well with the key because she really wants to be taking horror herself in order to damage enemies. And if it's being sent to the key instead, that doesn't work all that well. Carolyn's special ability doesn't synergize particularly well either with it, at least in solo play, because she needs to be taking that horror so she can heal horror and accelerate her resource generation. So I think those 2 may not play the key as often, but many other investigators will certainly take a look at it. If you're paying 5 experience points for a card, you really expect something powerful in return, and you're definitely getting your money's worth if you purchase the Key of Yees. The Key is a powerful relic, and it's really a fitting conclusion to the Path to Carcosa cycle. I love cards that create new deck archetypes, so I'm looking forward to seeing what players do with the Key in the months to come. I think time will tell if the card is broken, but the fact that it costs 5 experience points and forces players to take a pass on other powerful cards, at least temporarily, should keep its power in check. You're also not going to see it in multiplayer games. I mean, it's unique, so only one deck can take it. So it's not like you're going to sit down at a table and have 4 Key of Yees decks wrecking scenarios. And even if the card is a bit overpowered, the beauty of the cooperative LCG is that you don't necessarily need to play with all the cards that are above the power curve to stay competitive as you would with a competitive CCG or an LCG. You know, I've beaten plenty of scenarios in the past without a card like the Key of Yees, and I expect to beat plenty more in the future, whether it's in my deck or not. It's just nice to have that option, another deck building option to pursue, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what archetypes players come up with. Will we see Key Zoe, Key Rex? Who knows? Only time will tell. That's going to do it for my look at the neutral cards as well as Dim Carcosa. If you enjoyed the review, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.